Hi, everyone. I am the host and speaker of the show Truth and Lies. My name is Eddie Yousif, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us. Please comment, subscribe, share, and even on YouTube, that is being shot live as well. I'd like for us to share, comment, and subscribe to our channel as well. On today's show of the Truth and Lies, the topic is Muhammad, the God of Islam. I chose this topic specifically on purpose to show the audience that Muslims oftentimes revere the messenger rather than the person who is giving the message. So they do respect Muhammad more than Allah, the God of Islam himself. And throughout the show, we're going to show you all these details that are specified in the Hadith and the Quran as well. Our phone number here is 248-416-1300. We will open up the phone lines in approximately 15 minutes. With us via Skype, that's joining us, will be Bill Warner and Jay Smith. Bill Warner, why don't you give us a little bit about yourself and how can people reach you?
I'm a scientist, and after 9/11, I decided to devote myself to making the doctrine of Islam clear and easy to understand. I run a website called politicalislam.com. I've written over a dozen books, including I publish my own Qurans, which are a little different than most Qurans because all they contain all the information. They're actually easy to read and understand.
Well, thank God for your work. Also with us via Skype is Dr. Jay Smith. Jay Smith, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and how can people reach you as well?
Yes, hi, Eddie. I have been working with Islam, about almost 40 years now. I have a doctorate in Islamic polemics, which is a word not many people know. In other words, I go on the offense, and that's what polemics is. And I have a YouTube channel, Fander Films. It's spelled Pfander Films, Films. Just go up and put my name, Jay Smith, on YouTube, and it'll go right through it. I put up about a new video every 3 days. Really engaging on the historical problems with Islam, which really zero in on both the Quran and Muhammad, including this subject that we're going to be doing today.
Well, thank you for your hard work as well. You are no strangers to the show. You and Bill Warner, thank you guys for joining us. Let's start off with the name of Muhammad. The name of Muhammad is talking about a praised one itself. We know from this Yemeni scholar who said that his name is not even Muhammad, that is the real name of the person. But what does Muhammad means? The name Hamd means praise. The name Hamid, or the title Hamid, means the praised one. Muhammad also means the praised one. As a matter of fact, number 56 of the 99 names that the Muslims mention that they ascribe to God, number 56, it is Al-Hamid or Al-Hamidu, which means, again, the praised one, which is the name of Muhammad. So I'll go to Brother Jay. Brother Jay, where did this concept of God or Allah come from? And then why are these Muslims showing more respect to Muhammad than Allah himself?
Well, that's a loaded question, and I'll go ahead and try to tackle it. One of the difficulties we're having is where where in history does this word Allah, which just means the God, it's just a generic term. It's not even a name. It's a title, the God. And so you need to ask, well, where does the name of this God refer to? And to understand that, you need to go to those people that gave us the Arabic language. And the Arabic language comes from the Nabatean language. And the Nabateans were those who actually were the original, well, you might say the original Muslims. Before they became Muslim, they were Nabateans. And the Nabateans were much, much further north. They were not in Mecca or Medina. They were up around Petra, Medina Saleh, way up in what is today Jordan, about 600 miles further north. It is their language, the Nabatean language, where we get the word Ilaha, which is the name Allah. Now, Ilaha is the generic title for the name of the god named Dushara. Dushara is the god of the Petrians. Dushara is the god of the Nabateans. And if you go to Petra, you will see the temple of Dushara there. That is the god, the senior god, or the god, the creator of all. That is his name. But his title is Ilaha, the god. Now, here's what's interesting, Eddie. When you unpack that a little, but what do we know about Allah? What do Muslims tell us about Allah? Well, they say that Allah is one. La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah. That's the Shahada. There is only one God but God, and that is Allah. Here's the problem. If Allah is one, then the Muslims need to go back and they need to see where this name Ilaha, where it comes from. The fact that if he is one, then of course he cannot have any partners, he cannot have any consort. That's very clear in the Quran. In the Quran, in chapter 6, verse 101, it says very clear that God cannot have a partner, cannot have a consort. What we now know, and what we do know about Ilaha, from which Allah comes from, this God has a consort. Her name is Alat. Alat is the feminine form of Allah. Alat is the generic name for Al-Uzza, which is the consort of Dushara. Dushara, the God, the creator, whose wife is Al-Uzza, whose name is, or say, whose title is Alat. Now, stop and think. Those of you who know Arabic, I'm sorry, those of you who know the Quran have heard those names before. Alat, Al-Uzza, and Al-Manat. In Surah 53, ayah 19 and 20, these are known as the satanic verses. Two of those names are the same goddess. This is the Nabatean goddess. This is the Petran goddess, who is the wife of Dushara, who is the wife of Ilaha, Allah. So it's fascinating. The very God that we're talking about is the God that was used right across that part of the world. The Sassanians borrowed that name. The Nabateans had that name. The Muslims then adopted that name. That is the name that you now find in the Quran, and yet it's a Nabatean name. But what's even worse, it is not just a Nabatean name, it is a polytheistic name, because this God has a wife. And Muslims tell me that God cannot have a wife. They say that he cannot have a son as well. And yet then what are they doing with this Nabatean God who has a wife named Alat? So right away you can see, historically speaking, they've got the wrong God. And that's why when people come to me and ask me, should we therefore then make the God of the Bible, should we make him Allah? I would say, have nothing to do with this God. This is a pagan God, this is a polytheistic God, and it stands to reason then why this God was then adopted by the Muslims later on to then include in the Quran, because they are the descendants of the Nabateans.
Right, right. So even though when we open up our Bibles today in Arabic, you will find the word Allah for God, but after years of subjugation under Islamic oppression, we were as Christians forced to put that word in there. But the word for God is Al-Rabb, or the Lord as we would say it today. That is what is involved in the Arabic Bible as well. So if some of us were interested about Muhammad's real name, how he changed it from Qatham to Muhammad, you can go to islamonline.net and then you can find the article written by Muhammad Hamurani, which is a Yemeni scholar, a real good scholar, and this is an Islamic website, who says the real name of Muhammad is Qatham, and it's not even Muhammad, it's just a title. Muhammad is a title, means the praised one, as we've demonstrated earlier. This God, the God of Islam, Dr. Bill, seems that he changes his mind. And oftentimes, Muslims will claim that us Christians have this doctrine of abrogation. Yet we have no doctrine of abrogation. This is just God being fulfilled. He is fulfilled totally and utterly in Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is the fulfillment of the Old Testament. There is no abrogation. So how could this God make mistakes and then he has to abrogate that which he said earlier in the Quran?
Well, this is an interesting question, because although I'm not God, I would figure that I could write a book as small as the Quran without making a lot of mistakes and have to go back and do redos or play-agains.
Mm-hmm.
So this, when you discover this, it's like, wait a minute, you didn't get it right the first time, or you didn't know this was going to happen? Because Allah is portrayed as being all-knowing and all present, and yet there seem to be times in which he didn't really understand the situation he was addressing. Mm-hmm. So this business of abrogation is something that you just go, really? I mean, it doesn't make sense. If God is perfect, couldn't he do a good first draft?
That's right. And it seems like whatever God has said in the Quran, here comes Muhammad on the scene and changes it at will. We have no command from Allah himself that says to change it. So let me give you an example. In the Old Testament, in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 14, verses 6 through 8, God is giving out a commandment. Do not eat swine, pork. Do not eat animals or the animals of the sea as well that have seashells, like shellfish or anything of that nature. But he also includes do not eat the rabbit in that whole of do not eat list. The rabbit was involved as one of them. So then this was a command given out to Moses and to the Jews. Here comes Muhammad on the scene and he says, hey, I'm following this same God, the God of Muhammad. Yet he himself, that is Muhammad, decided to give out a command to say, don't eat the pork. But he himself ate from the rabbit. So he's picking and choosing what he can do as if he was God. And how do I know that he's eating the rabbit? You can go to Sahih al-Bukhari, hadith number 2572, or you can also see hadith number 5489. So here he comes on the scene and he says, this is the God of the Old Testament who said to do something, and I'm from him. I'm following him. I'm the seal of all prophets. I'm the last of all prophets. Yet the same command that is given to Moses, whom you claim to be from Muhammad, you are telling your people, don't eat the pork, and God is telling Moses and his people, don't eat the pork and the rabbit. So you're supposed to follow that, but yet you eat rabbits. And it's okay for others to eat rabbits because here is Muhammad, who's the final messenger, who is a person to all mankind that they should follow. So we see a kind of contradiction here that is happening with Muhammad and with the God of Islam. And it seems like that this God of Islam is just a sock puppeteer of Muhammad, and he is controlling him. So why is this Muhammad, Dr. J, really, really important to Muslims historically? It seems like more important than God himself.
Yeah, and that in order to answer that question, you need to go right back to the history. You need to go back and see what was happening in the 7th century. You need to go back and see what was happening politically. And it's very clear that these Nabateans who don't call themselves Muslims. Isn't it interesting? They don't refer to themselves as Muslims. We don't see that word introduced until around 691, 692. Muhammad died in 632. We don't see any reference to the word Islam. We don't see any reference to this man named Muhammad that we're referring on this show in any documentation from Arab sources. We see it from outside Arab sources, but not from Arab sources. But these people were conquering. They conquered Basra, Baghdad, Damascus, Jerusalem, and Cairo by 649, 650. So these great cities were being conquered by these Arabs. So what did they call themselves? Well, they called themselves Muhajirun, which means people of the Hijra, people who are moving from one place to the other. They call themselves Maghreb because they're from the Maghreb. They call themselves Hagarines because they were in the line of Hagar. They call themselves Ishmaelites because they're in the line of Ishmael. And they use the word Saracen. That was usually what the Europeans used for them. No reference to these people called Muslims. Now, what's fascinating, as they took over these cities, and remember, by the time 661 comes into power, when Muawiyah takes over and introduces the Umayyad Caliphate, this is after the 4 rightly guided caliphs. We don't have anything about the 4 rightly guided caliphs from any historical literature up in that time. But we do have about Muawiyah. And when you look at Muawiyah, who's the first caliph, he's up there in Damascus. He now controls all the land from Afghanistan all the way over to Tripoli. All that land is under his control. So he comes to power. There's nothing in. We've been looking at the coins in the last few weeks. I don't know if you've been up on Fander Films. We've looked at the coins, and his coins don't have any reference to anything Islamic on them. His coins are all Zoroastrian, or they're all Christian. They have crosses, and they have the Zoroastrian. They have the fire altar, but there's nothing Islamic about any of these coins until we get to Abdul Malik. It's Abdul Malik that we finally see introduce these coins. It's Abdul Malik that builds the Dome of the Rock. It's Abdul Malik that has the caliphal protocols that we've been looking at. And when you look at the caliphal protocols, when you look at the Dome of the Rock, when you look at the coins himself, his coins that he introduces in 692, take a look at those coins and you will see there is where Muhammad is introduced. On the coins, on the caliphal protocols, and on the Dome of the Rock, on the inner ambulatories of the Dome of the Rock. All in 691 and 692. Why did he have to do that? Well, look and see what the coins are saying. Just unpack them. We're going to get into this later on, so I don't want to do it right now. But when you look at the coins, you will see that these coins are all attacking Christianity. They're attacking the person of Jesus Christ to begin with. They're attacking his divinity. They're attacking the Trinity. They're attacking his begetness, and the fact that he would be, as they believe, an associate of God. So what is happening politically? Here you have finally a strong caliph came to power in 685. He's the second of the Marwanid caliphs within the Umayyad Caliphate. He then has to imprint and impose his power. And what does he do? His biggest threat are the Byzantines, who are the Christians. And so he imposes against Christian view of Jesus as God. He then introduces his prophet. He introduces it on the Dome of the Rock, a huge building, the biggest of its kind. Why does he introduce it in Jerusalem? Why doesn't he introduce it in Damascus where he's living? Because Jerusalem was the seat of Byzantine Christianity and Judaism. And that's why he puts it up on the hill, looking down onto the Church of the Sepulchre, so it looks down on it as a one-upmanship. And look at the inner ambulatory, the only part of the Dome of the Rock that's original, and you will see that all those instructions, all those inscriptions have nothing to do about Muhammad going up to seven heavens, have nothing to do about the Miraj, which Muslims tell us the building was built for, have nothing to do with that. They are all against Christianity. They are all against Jesus, his sonship, the divinity, the Trinity. It's against everything that Christianity believes. It's really, you might say, Islam was created to attack Jesus Christ. And what do? Then you have Surah 112 that is imposed. But it's not the same Surah 112 that we have in our Quran today. There it's a Surah 112. Nor does he begetteth, nor is he begotten. For truly, there is only one God but God, and Muhammad is his prophet. Now you have the La ilaha illallah, the idea that God is one, and there Muhammad is introduced. He is introduced as the new God. Not the new God, but the new prophet. He is the one that's introduced alongside God. The two are introduced simultaneously to one-up the person of Jesus Christ. So it's a political statement. It's a theological statement. It was introduced in 691. That's hugely important, because then look and see what happens in 692, 693, and 696. We don't have time to unpack it today, but if you'll go up and look at the video that I put up 2 weeks ago on the coins, you will see exactly the sequence of why Abd al-Malik was now introducing his prophet. Remember, the Arabs, they are from the line of Ishmael, they are from the line of Hagar. That's why they call themselves Hagarenes and Ishmaelites. The Arabs now controlled all this land from Tripoli all the way to Afghanistan. They controlled all these major cities, but they do not have a prophetic line like the Christians and Jews. They do not have revelation like the Christians and Jews. The Christians and Jews have two revelations, and they have a prophetic line which does not include Ishmael. So what are you going to do? Well, after 40 years of being in charge, you can see why Abd al-Malik finally had to introduce his prophet. And this prophet is going to be greater than all the other prophets, and that's why he is then imposed on the Dome of the Rock, there on the protocols, and then on the coins. From that time on, by 696, then 4 years after that, he then takes off all the images and only has Quranic script. That's what we need to get into. Look at that Quranic script. Look and see what he's saying there. And we will unpack that later on in the show, because that's hugely significant. So why was Muhammad introduced? Why was Muhammad needed? They needed to have a prophet, number one, and they needed to have a revelation. That prophet had to have a revelation. So therefore, you had to introduce Muhammad, and you had to do so on as big as you can get it. Get it on the coins, because the coins go all over the country. They go all over the empire. Everybody can see this on the coins. That's how you introduce yourself. They didn't have television. They didn't have YouTube. They didn't have radio. They didn't have newspapers. They didn't have Eddie Yousif telling them what they're to believe, or Bill Warner explaining all their politics to them. They needed coins, and coins are how you get that message out. And that's why the coins are significant, and that's why we finally have material that actually shows you how Islam began. So, all in a nutshell, why did they name Muhammad? In order to create their own Islamic identity, they needed Muhammad.
That's right. And you touched on something that I oftentimes use when I go door to door in Dearborn, I'm talking to Muslims. I just want them to use a little logic as I'm going to use some logic, and I pray that everybody who's watching will use some logic when watching this, when hearing this. Satan, if he was to attack a specific religion, and that religion happens to be of God, which religion would he attack? And oftentimes the people would say, well, it's Christianity. Well, it's no wonder why Christianity is the most attacked, is the most persecuted religion, if I could call it that, on this earth. It is because Satan is hard at work attacking it. That's why you have Islam, who attacks this polytheism, or says that we are polytheists, and attacks us even in their prayers. God is not born, and he doesn't have a son, even in their the prayers that they begin with. This is oftentimes what they say. But oftentimes we can find out this God that we serve, about we can find out more about him in the afterlife, or how we're supposed to think about him here in the afterlife, how we're told about him here in the afterlife. So for an example, for the Muslim, when he dies in the afterlife, there will be 72 virgins, according to the hadiths. 72 virgins for me to enjoy, and this is the afterlife for the Muslim in a nutshell. And what is the afterlife for the Christian? We will have no more pain, no more suffering. God will wipe away every tear from our eye, and He will be with us forever. We will be fully satisfied. We will not need sex or anything of that nature. But how about hell? In the Christian, the hell is everything that is good that exists today will be absent. Let me go to Dr. Bill. What about hell? What does hell have to teach us about Muhammad, his character, who he is, or even his God?
First, let me make a remark what J. Smith said. Archaeology is very cruel to Islam. I think J. Smith would agree with that. The more we dig up what were actually documents of that time, the more we discover that Islam is not telling us the truth. But anyway, when I published my own Quran, which my goal was to make it readable, one of the things that I noticed was there was an incredible amount of information about hell. As a matter of fact, hell seems to be one of the favorite topics of the Meccan Quran, not the Medinan Quran, but the Meccan Quran. Now, what's interesting is it always tells you why people are in hell. And it becomes interesting to notice that the majority of the people in hell are not there for immorality, killing, raping, stealing, lying, whatever. Instead, they're there for another reason. They're there because they do not believe that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. So hell becomes a political document, not an ethical document. So I found this to be very interesting, that hell is not for the punishment of those who are evil, but hell is for the punishment of those who do not believe Muhammad is the prophet of Allah. Now, this points up to the point that the entire Meccan Quran is a document that keeps hammering on the same point. Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. Now, it seems to me that if Muhammad were truly the messenger of Allah, he wouldn't be so fixated upon himself, but instead what the Quran would be a reflection of what is good for humanity and how humanity can lead a prosperous and good existence. So I found, like I say, the story of hell shows us that the fixation of the document, the Quran, is about the man Muhammad. And if we look at if you take and total up the text of Bukhari, the Sirah, and the Quran, you'll discover something interesting. Only 14% of the text is devoted to Allah. 86% is devoted to Muhammad. So this, once again, we see an imbalance here. If this is not the worship of God, but the worship of Muhammad. Something else that's interesting. I'm told that you cannot tell a joke about Muhammad, and I've seen what happens if you try to draw a cartoon about Muhammad. But you can occasionally get by with a joke about Allah. Now, this is a strange inversion as well. Once again, Muhammad seems to be more important than Allah. So that's what I draw from the Quran and study of Quran and its use of the system of hell. By the way, it's very interesting that in the Medinan Quran, hell is no longer used so much because in Mecca, the Quran is punishing those in the future. But once Muhammad had enough political power, he took care of the punishment that hell was going to deliver, and he administered it now in the name of jihad.
That's right, that's right. But not only that, we have this ultimate God who cares about people who pray for him or pray to him. He gives out a command in the Quran 24:58 and in the Quran chapter 2 verse 238. We have the dawn prayer, the middle prayer, and the night prayer as Muslims are supposed to pray. This is the command of this sovereign God. Yet Muhammad comes on the scene and he says this, Sahih al-Bukhari, volume 1, Book 8, Hadith 345. It's a long hadith. This is about when Muhammad goes up to heaven, supposedly, and he talks to God, and God is asking, doesn't even talk to God, he talks to God through Moses and through Gabriel. And he's asking God about the prayers. It goes down from 50 to 40, all the way down to 5 prayers. And this is what it says. Towards the end of that hadith that I mentioned, so I returned to Allah. This is Muhammad talking. These are 5 prayers that God had reduced it to, and they are the equivalent of 50. And God says, my word does not change in that hadith. What do you mean your word doesn't change? Because at first you ask for 3 prayers. And then the hadith says, no, ask for 5 prayers instead of 50, and my word doesn't change. Well, Allah, you just contradicted yourself. So how are you supposed to believe in this seal of all prophets and in this last prophet and in you if you're contradicting yourself within your own book, within your own hadith, within your own stories? So we see that the Muslims today are praying 5 times. Well, the command of Allah was 3 times. Why not revere and respect God's command? You're respecting Muhammad more than God himself. Let me go to you, Brother Jay. Who introduced this Muhammad as a co-equal with God? Because in their salat it says, La ilaha illallah, and Muhammad is the Rasulullah. So there's an enjoining right next to Allah's name. So who introduced this Muhammad to be a co-equal with God? And why exactly did they do it? Where did they do it? Why did they do it? Hone in on that for us a little bit, since we've done the study.
Yeah, no, some of that I've already answered in the previous question, but let's go ahead and explain, unpack what we're trying to see here. To understand who actually introduced it, I think it's very clear it's Abdul Malik, because we don't see anything earlier than this. We don't have any reference. We've remember what Dr. Bill said a few minutes ago. He said that archaeology destroys Islam. It does. Archaeology destroys Islam. I have a phrase that I used to say on my British Museum tour. The more we scratch, the more we find. The more we find, the more we shine. The more we shine, the more they whine. Oh, how sublime. Because when you look at archaeology, it actually just supports the Bible right, left, and center. And we did a whole tour of the British Museum just looking at all the artifacts in the Assyrian period, in the Babylonian period, in the Persian period that support 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, 1st and 2nd Samuel, the book of Isaiah, the book of Jeremiah, and lots of the book of Genesis. There's so much material that supports the Bible, but that is not happening with the Quran. Just the opposite is happening with the Quran. And one of the biggest problems we've always had with Islam, not just the Quran, but with Islam on face value, is this whole earliest period when Muhammad was introduced. We just don't have anything that's there. Everything that we're talking about, all the stuff that we're referring to, whenever you get into a conversation with a Muslim or anything about Islam, to understand who Muhammad is, to understand what he did, to understand what he said, to understand what Mecca is all about, how the Quran was put together, all these stories do not come from the same century Muhammad lived. They all come from 200 to 300 years later, from Ibn Hisham, who died in 833, from Al-Waqidi, who died in 835, from Sahih Bukhari, who died in 870, Sahih Muslim, who died in 875, Al-Tabari, who died in 923. Just look at the dates. That's the 9th and 10th century for everything that was happening in the 7th century. That's 200 to 300 years too late. And so therefore, we've never really had anything here in the 7th century that we could look at. And so always our arguments have been an argument from silence. And that's difficult, because if it's an argument from silence, it doesn't mean it didn't happen. It just means that we cannot argue against it until we came across the Qiblas and the mosques. Dan Gibson and his great material, if you look and see what he's done on all these mosques, every mosque he's looked at up until 706. Remember, Muhammad died in 632. The Qibla was canonized in 620, 621, 624, according to the Quran, if Surah 2 is correct. 624, that's when it was canonized. So from 624 up until 706. So you're talking about over 70 years, or almost 80 years, every mosque from as far away as Guangzhou in China, Sherman in India, from Syria, Jordan, down in Yemen, every mosque is facing Petra. Not one is facing Mecca. So already we can see archaeologically there's a problem here. And then you need to ask, if Islam got this wrong, if they got even their history wrong at this point, what about the city of Mecca itself? And we now know that there is no reference to any city called Mecca until 741 in the Apocalypse Byzantinia Continuato. That's the first reference we can find anywhere of the city of Mecca. 741, that's over 100 years after Muhammad died. Can you see everything we're now looking at is proving that the whole history of who Muhammad was, what he did, where he came from, why is it that he's even introduced and what he said, is 200 to 300 years too late. Let's go back to the 7th century. And when we go back to the 7th century, we now understand why Muhammad had to be chosen. He had to be chosen, as I said earlier, he had to be chosen as a you might say, as a counterpoint to Jesus Christ. They needed somebody who was as big as Jesus. Remember, their biggest threat, and this is why you said earlier in the show, why is it the Muslims are always so antagonistic towards us? Why is it all their discussions, when you go to their meetings, they're not talking about Islam, they're confronting Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
Every meeting I've been to, whenever I go into an Islamic society on the university campuses, I would just invite myself in. I went into many of these societies all over London, and in every one I went to, I was the only non-Muslim there. I was mostly the only white man there. And as I was listening to them, I wanted to hear about Islam. The title of the talk was about Islam. They said nothing about Islam. They were always attacking Christianity. Why? Because we are their greatest threat. Not
Yes.
politically, not economically. We are their greatest threat theologically because of this book. It's this book that is their greatest threat, and it's the man behind this book that is their greatest threat. They do not know what to do with Jesus, because Jesus is everything they need. Jesus is everything they want. They've got to find someone that's greater than Jesus. They've got to find somebody that's better than Jesus. They've got to find an alternate to Jesus that is not Christian, that is not from the Bible. That's why Muhammad had to be chosen. That's why Abdul Malik. It took the Arabs almost 60 years. I said, no, let me rephrase that. 70 years to finally introduce Muhammad. And that's why when you look, even in the Quran, take a look. How many times do you see the name Muhammad in here? Only 4 times. It's only found 4 times. In Surah 3, Ayah 144. In Surah 33, Ayah 40. In Surah 47, Ayah 2. And in Surah 48, Ayah 29, his name is not here. Oh, it refers to a messenger. Oh, it does refer to the messenger of God. All the way through, only 4 times. Jesus is referred to 93 times. So even the Quran still didn't know what to do with this man, Muhammad. And you have been intimating that this may not even be the right name. It may be nothing more than the praised one. So all of this needs to be brought together. And when you look at it historically, and that's my job today, is to look at it historically. When you look at it historically, it is very clear that Muhammad had to be introduced as a counterpart to Jesus Christ. Muhammad, they needed as the greatest of all prophets, the seal of all the prophets, the final prophet. And that's why when they finally got around to looking at this book and realizing who Jesus was and what he said, that was not done until the 11th century by Ibn Hazm in 1056. Until 1056, they had no idea that this book contradicted this book. Mm-hmm. They had no idea with what they were dealing with. And that's why this whole idea of corruption of Scripture was only introduced 400 years later. Because when you look at the Quran and you look at the person, just look at the person of Muhammad in here. And when you see that the references in here saying that they can find Muhammad in this book and they can't find him anywhere. They've tried their best to find him. In Deuteronomy 18, they try to find him in Song of Solomon 5:16. They try to find him in John chapter 14, in John chapter 16. There's a whole industry trying to find Muhammad in our Bible. They can't find him, because he doesn't belong in our Bible. He was never there. There was no Muhammad. There was no reference of him. There is no reference of Muhammad in any Arab sources until 691. So finally, when he is introduced, then they splash him all over. And he's on the coins, he's on the protocols, he's on the domes of the rock, and he stays there. And what's fascinating, Dr. Yehuda Neville, who has done the work on the earliest inscriptions, when he looked at the protocols and he noticed all the protocols leading up through the Sufyani period, all the way up to the Marwani period, up to Abd al-Malik himself in 685. All the protocols, which are the official documents that are written by the caliphs, there is no Bismillah, there is no Shahada, there is no reference to Muhammad, there is no reference to the Quran, there is no reference to Mecca in any of this. And then in 691, Abd al-Malik is in power. He's been in power for 6 years. In 691, he then introduces Muhammad, the Shahada, La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, and it's introduced overnight. Yep. Overnight. That's how suddenly it is. And then from that time on, every protocol, including all the protocols for the Umayyads, all start with the Bismillah al-Rahman al-Rahim. And then it goes into the Shahada that is introduced. So it's fascinating me. You can see this is a political movement. This is for political reasons. This is right up your street, Bill. You're the political guy. And so you can see this fits right into your narrative, because if you want to understand Islam, you have to go beyond the theology. You have to go to the politics of the day. The theology then had to follow. And did you notice the theology of Islam does not get introduced until the 9th century. It took them another 200 years to get the theology to catch up with it. And take a look at the theology. Almost all the theology is in contradistinction to Christianity. Well, that's a no-brainer. Of course it is. Again, because we are their biggest threat.
Amen. Thank you for that. Jay, you honed in on something where Jesus is mentioned 93 times in the Quran, and Muhammad's name it's only 4 times. So is the pig in Arabic, al-khanzir. The pig is only mentioned 4 times, an equivalent of their prophet. I just thought that was an interesting way of putting it. But we're going to take a break. After we come back, we're going to open up the phone lines. The phone number here is 248-416-1300. We'll see you back in just a minute.
Hello, viewers. You will now be able to watch ABN programming on the iStar box. By purchasing and connecting this box to high-speed internet, you will be able to watch the English Trinity channel and our Arabic ABN channel in HD. For more information, you can call the numbers listed on your screen. Thank you and God bless.
Now in the palm of your hand is the updated ABN SAD app, so you can now watch all the programs, shows, and channels in different languages. You can download the app in the App Store related to your device. Once downloaded, you will see 6 different categories within the ABN SAT app. The first category being the English category, which includes 18 different channels. The Arabic category includes 31 channels. The Worship category has 5 channels. The Discipleship category includes 5 channels as well. For more information, please call the numbers on your screen or visit our website at trinitychannel.com.
All right, folks, good to be back. Again, the phone lines are now open. The phone number here is 248-416-1300. We are approaching the last 30 minutes of the show. With that said, I want to go back to Dr. Bill. Now, we know from the Quran that no story has its fullness as we know it from the Old Testament. The only story that is mentioned from the beginning all the way to the end is the story of Joseph and his brothers and what took place. Now, what does this tell us about this Quran or about this Allah of the Quran, who is never having a full logical statement in mind and follows it through?
Well, I'm struck by this. One of the things, by the way, I'm getting an echo in I'm hearing myself speak. Can we take care of that?
Sure, we'll take care of it right away.
Okay. Anyway, it's difficult. Sorry, I'm stumbling, but when I hear myself, that's better. One of the things is when you read the Quran, you notice that it's not complete. And this to me is the largest failure of the Quran. Because surely if God were transmitting to us, I'm going to call it a manual for life, that you'd want to give all the points. And yet we see that if we go through the 5 things that a Muslim is supposed to do, not a single one of them are found in the Quran. The Shahada, for instance, is not really found in the Quran. The details of the zakat, how jihad is to actually be done. Nowhere do we find anything that is completely laid out. The only reason you can know how to do any of these things is pray, for instance, the right way, is we find those in the Hadith. Where do the Hadith come from? They come from Muhammad. So it's interesting here to me that when you look at the Quran, it is an incomplete document. This to me, once again, if we're trying to believe that God himself transmitted this document, you would think he could fill in all the details for himself, and yet we're left with the fact that it has to be done by Muhammad. By the way, I'd like to add something to what Jay Smith said. I'm known for counting words. And the majority, if you take the Quran, the Sirah, and the Hadith, and you use Bukhari for the Hadith, over half of this is devoted not to being a good Muslim, but attacking the kafir. That is, this document, the Quran, is fixated on not just simply giving you a better way of life, an improved way of life, but it always has to attack. And it's the kafir who's the filthy animal. I mean, when I read about myself in the Quran, it's like I'm disgusting, I'm filthy, I'm plotted against, I can be killed, raped. This is unpleasant reading. And by the way, I think it's one of the many reasons that the Quran is not well read, is that people, non-believers look at it and go, he's talking about me. But the main thing I get from the Quran is it is not a complete document. No. And so I ask myself, why couldn't God write a complete, fill in all the details? It's all there to be known.
And why couldn't God just follow his own way of pattern, his own pattern of thinking or of writing? From the Old Testament to the New, we have full stories, and it's mentioned in full detail. Why not do that since this is the last book? With that said, we have a phone call from Brother Alan. Alan, go ahead. What is your question, comment, or objection?
Well, this is addressed to Jay, I guess, primarily.
Mm-hmm.
Apart from yourself, Jay, who are the primary historians who are creating or recreating the actual true historical story on the creation of Islam? Muhammad, the Quran, the Hadith. What was the story? What was the background? I know it's difficult, but who else is working on this issue?
Good question. The people who are really at the forefront are what we call the Orientalists, and they're coming primarily out of Germany and England. We don't have many yet here in the United States. When I was in Britain, in London, I studied under some of them. That's why, in some ways, I'm ahead of the game the game here in the United States. I studied under Dr. Gerald Hawting. He was the primary one that was teaching this whole, what they call the historical critique of Islam. I got it way back in 1994. So I've known about this for 25 years. And I was studying, and I also got to know Dr. Patricia Corona, who's probably the foremost in the world in this area. Dr. Patricia Corona did her doctorate at School of Oriental and African Study there in the University of London. She then was headhunted she was then asked to come and teach at Oxford University. And there she was head of a department at Oxford University. Now, this woman reads and writes 15 languages, all archaic languages. I don't know how many you can read, but I certainly cannot read and write 15 archaic languages. So nobody has been able to equal her. And because of that, she is the first one to go back to the original documents and read it in their original form. That's why she's so dangerous. And in 1977, she wrote Hagerism with Dr. Michael Cook, who's also one of the foremost in this area. That exploded this whole thing, and it's still controversial today. And it's a what-if scenario. So she is the first, she and Dr. Michael Cook, who was head of department at SOAS, and was also then joined her at Princeton University, because when she wrote this book in Hagerism, she then came up a follow-up book called Meccan Trade and the Rise of Islam in 1987. She got a death threat for writing that book. And all she did was ask historical questions about Mecca, which every historian should do. Any historian worth their salt should do that. Now, when she got a death threat, she had to leave from Oxford, go to Cambridge University, was head of department at Cambridge University. That's when I got to know her. When I started my doctoral thesis, she was one of my first supervisors, my second supervisor, they called it, but one of my first. And I remember back in 1995, when I was going to do my first debate with Dr. Jamal Badawi there at Cambridge University, I went to her the day before the debate, and I asked her to go through the 10 different challenges, historical challenges that I was going to give Dr. Jamal Badawi on Islam, on Mecca, on the Quran, on Muhammad. She went through my list of 10. She said, that's good. No, that's not good enough. Here's a better way to say it. So basically, she put together my paper. She put together my debate. And I said, why don't you do it? She says, I'm an academic. I cannot debate. I'm not permitted to debate. You can. You have the freedom to debate. I don't. I have a chair to protect. She had an institution to protect. And that's the problem with many of these academics. They can do the research, but they cannot actually do the debating, because if they were to do so, and this is one of the ironies, and this is one of the difficulties, Islam is probably the only area of research that what you say may kill you.
Yep. Which is...
Let's know this.
Yeah.
And because of that, she could not do this debate. Now, she's not the only one. You have also... you have Dr. Wansborough, Dr. John Wansborough, who was the one that actually blew this all open in 1977 and 1978 with 2 books. Not Chrono Geography. I can't remember the name. They skipped my mind right at the top of my head. I can't remember the 2 books. Sectarian Milieu and Chronic, not geography, but chronic something, chronic exegesis or chronic hagiography. Those 2 books blew open this whole area of looking at Islam historically. There's others that have come behind. And it's because of those Orientalists and the Germans like Dr. Gerhard Prinn, Dr. Oleg, Dr. von Bothmer. These are the ones who are doing it with the Quran especially. They're the ones that are looking at the earliest manuscripts. These are way ahead of what we're doing in the United States. Now, they're the top in the world. Nobody is close to them as far as in importance. They understand these languages. They do the germinal research. What our job is, like Dr. Bill Warner and Eddie Yousif and myself, our job is to get this material and get it out to the layman.
And not only that, I would say, Alan, that's a good question. I would also say, look at the Arabic. If you want to understand the Quran in its fullness, really, I know the Arabic and I read it in the Arabic and I translate these words. Majority of the time, you'll find the English does not match what the Arabic says. And I see a lot of deception there to try to hide the embarrassing things that are mentioned. Even in the Hadith, it's done like that. Or Al-Qurtubi, that particular author has so many things to say in Arabic that if you were to read them in Arabic and translate them, there is no good translation of it in English. If you were to read it in Arabic, you would just hit your head against the wall a million times. You'd go crazy of how bad this is and how embarrassing this is. With that said, let us go to Dr. Bill. Now, Dr. Bill, even Aisha said about Muhammad, God is quick to grant you whatever you want. We have this God whose name is Allah, or title is Allah. He is quick to grant Muhammad exactly what he wants. Is that the way he operates? And why does that happen?
Well, it's interesting because if you lay out the Quran in the right time sequence and you put Muhammad's life into it like this, you discover something. There's a cause and effect relationship between Muhammad and Allah. Whatever Muhammad needs, Allah grants, which is the hadith that I quoted that segment from. So again and again, problems are taken care of by Muhammad coming in, God coming in and saying this. For instance, there's that verse in the Quran where it says, it was okay to burn the palm trees. That's not a quote. And you go, palm trees? What palm trees? Because if you're reading the Quran, it's the first time palm trees have been brought up and you feel ambushed. But if you put Muhammad's life beneath that, you'll discover that about 10 days before that, Muhammad had attacked some Jews and they couldn't defeat them, and so he burned their palm tree plantation. This violated Arabic war law. So now then, Muhammad had a problem with the Arabs, which was he was now a war criminal. But Allah comes in and grants him the wish that he needs, which is it was okay to burn them. So there's a cause and effect relationship, but it is always Muhammad's problems are being solved by Allah. Once again, isn't this sort of strange that Muhammad puppet is like Allah? By that I mean he seems to give him whatever he needs. And I think in this case, when Aisha said this was his desire to sleep or have as his wife, his adopted son's wife.
Yeah, Zainab. Yeah.
So again and again, Muhammad had a problem. Allah took care of it. This is a peculiar cause and effect relationship because as I think about God, I would think of God as a primary source who drives things, not somebody who's out here responding to a mess that's been made by somebody else.
Not only that, we have a hadith on God's throne. God's throne. God has nothing better to do than to write Muhammad's name on it. Muhammad's name is written all over the throne. I mean, look, Muhammad is God, Allah, is infatuated with Muhammad. He loves him so much that he has nothing better to do than to write his name, Muhammad's name, on his throne, where God is sitting and watching it all day long. Now, I'm going to go to Dr. J.
Can I insert something here?
Yeah, sure.
Alan asked the question to Dr. J. Smith. J. Smith's answer was brilliant, but it's also, there's a book the gentleman can buy, Alan, What the Modern Martyr Should Know by Pressburg, which summarizes some of this and it's accessible. So go ahead now. I just wanted to bring that in.
Well, thank you for bringing that in. Jay, time is fleeting from us. We only have about 15 minutes left of the show. So if you can be quick in answering this question, please, because I got more questions for the both of you. It's exciting. I want to get into it. What is the earliest form of the Shahada? And is it different from today? And how can we talk about it in this discussion? Why is it important?
Yeah, I'm going to just read to you what the original Shahada. Just take the earliest reference we have to the Shahada. Now, you're Arabic speaking. Yeah. I want you to translate this Shahada. I'm going to reread it in my broken Arabic, all right? So it's going to be deformed. Forgive me for that. But this is when you look out at the earliest Shahada that is introduced by Abdul Malik. It says this on the front side. Muhammad Rasul Allah arsalahu bi il-huda wa din al-haq liyudhiriyu ala al-dini kulahi wa lao kari al-mushrikun. Now,
it's hard for me to pick up what you're saying because I need to hear it in the Arabic. But so far what I got, the gist of it is, this is the prophet of God, and he is the one, you said al-haq, which means the truth or brings forth the truth. And then I couldn't pick up on the rest of it because,
That he
as an
might
American,
make
trying to read
prevail-
Arabic is hard.
That's right, but that he might make it prevail over all religions, even if the associators are averse.
Uh-huh,
Now,
okay.
what is that last second part doing there? What in the world is that part? That is not the Shahada we know today. Then on the reverse side of this coin, which is the earliest coin, Allahu Ahad Allahu Al Samad Lam Yalid Walam
Al-Samad
Yulad.
lam yalid wa lam yulad. Yes, he is the one and
Not
only.
because he begotten.
Hmm.
There again, where is this coming from? Well, that's not part of the Shahada. So what is this beget he's begotten? And what is this idea that he might make it prevail over all religion, even if the associations are averse? Well, you can see, what associations is he talking about? That comes out of Surah 5, ayah 72, that God has no associate. So that's attacking the idea that Jesus is the associate of God. Begetteth nor begotten, that's John 3:16. So it's attacking Jesus again. So this earliest Shahada is very much an attack against Jesus Christ. That no longer is the Shahada today. So you can see they've taken out the associates and they've taken out the begetting part of it. But that is the earliest one, proving that in the very beginning, the Shahada was really a confrontation about the person of Jesus Christ, his divinity, and his sonship. They're attacking the three major doctrines of Christianity right there. And that's why we need to take this on board. We need to understand that and to understand why is it they have to attack Jesus. We're going to get to that, and I'd like to end with that, because to me, that shows me that Islam was created for one reason and one reason alone: to supersede Christianity, to destroy our Lord Jesus Christ, to confront his divinity, to confront the Trinity, and to finally, especially, to confront his sonship.
Yes. Now, Bill, from the Old Testament, we see that God gives a command, the Ten Commandments, to Moses. That's because the laws of the land have not been established. They don't have an idea of what to do and what not to do. There are the Ten Commandments to keep them in line so that they can live better with each other and they can worship this true God. But it seems like here, what kind of a God allows his prophet to pass the judgment onto him? Now, he didn't do that with Moses. He was available, this God, during the time of Moses, especially in the wilderness. They would see him at night through the fire. They would see him in the morning through the cloud that covered them and took care of his people. There's manna. There's all kinds of evidence to support that there's a God that existed, but not here for Muhammad. So the question is, how can this God pass on the judgment to this human who is a sinner, according to chapter 47, verse 19, and chapter 48, verse 2, he's a sinner, just like me and you.
This is one of the more astounding things when I first started studying the Islamic doctrine in Quran, Sirah, Hadith, was that on Judgment Day, Muhammad, the only human being, here's all of the humanity who's been alive stretched out in front of God on his throne, but Muhammad can nudge God, Allah, and say, this one over here, for this or every reason, cut him some slack. And here, once again, we have the fact that Allah seems to be operating for the purposes of Muhammad, not for the purposes of creating humanity. And this was just one of those most bizarre things to me, that Muhammad would be able to speak for those who were his personal friends or had some relationship with, and say this to God in judgment: cut him some slack, let him go. And this was just one of the more preposterous things that I thought of, that a man would be standing next to God saying, this judgment, that judgment should prevail. And that God would say, well, okay, Muhammad, we'll do it your way. What?
Yeah, it is. I don't know what to call it other than obnoxious. Whatever it is that you need, just come to me, and I'm Allah, and I will grant you. It's almost like having a genie in a bottle. Instead of 3 wishes, it's 1,000 wishes. Brother Jay, let's go to you as we end the show here. I'll ask you one last question. When we do a comparison between supposedly the last prophet and Jesus himself, what do we find that's different in those two?
Yeah, and this is probably a good way to end off, because when you look at Muhammad and Jesus, you just do a comparison. I remember I was in Dearborn a number of years ago, and I went down to your Arab festival there in the summertime. And as I was walking around the crowd, I saw a guy holding a sign, and it said, Jesus and Muhammad, we love them both. So I went up to him and I said, I'm so glad you have Jesus above Muhammad. You must make sure you keep Jesus above Muhammad. He said, no, 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 no. They're both equal. I said, no, they're not. Jesus is superior to Muhammad. And I can show you from your own Quran. Let's just open up your own Quran. And I opened up, said, look at chapter 19. And I said, look at chapter 19, verse 20. And verse 20, it's very clear that Jesus was born of a virgin. Was Muhammad born of a virgin? He said, no. I said, already in his birth, he is superior to Muhammad in his birth. I said, look at chapter 3, verse 40. Chapter 3, verse 46. And I said, take a look and see what does it say there. And I said, it's verse 47. Chapter 3, verse 47, it has Jesus is in the cradle, and he's speaking from the cradle. And I said, could Muhammad speak from the cradle? So even in his infancy, he was superior to Muhammad. Then I said, go three verses later, and you will see in chapter 3, verse 49, that there is Jesus taking some mud, forming them into clay, blowing on them, and they fly up, and birds fly up into the air. Could Muhammad create out of anything? And he said, no, couldn't create out of anything. I said, see, he could do something that Muhammad couldn't do. And in the same verse, it says he gave sight to the blind, he resuscitated the dead, he was able to heal the leopards. Could Muhammad do any of this? And he said, no, couldn't he? I said, already, can you see? I've given you 6 areas where Jesus is superior to your prophet just from your own Quran. Then I went back and I said, let's end with chapter 19, verse 19. In chapter 19, verse 19, it says very clearly that Jesus, there is Gabriel talking to Mary, said that Jesus, Isa, is the righteous one, the perfect one, the sinless one. Only Jesus is the sinless one. I said, is Muhammad sinless? And he said, of course he is. I said, well, then why don't you go to chapter 48, verse 1 and 2, where there you see God is asking Muhammad to ask forgiveness for the sins he has done and the sins he is yet to do. So even as a prophet, he continues to sin, according to chapter 48, verse 1 and 2. Jesus never sinned. So I gave 7 areas right there within just 4 verses. By the time that I was finished, there was a huge crowd. The police came and asked the crowd to disperse. And I said, I'm not even gone to the Bible yet. I've just used your Quran. And just from your own Quran, I have shown 7 areas where Jesus is superior. But then I said, I want to just talk to you separately. I said, why is it, Dr. Bill Warner, you were talking about the Muhammad cartoons and the huge reaction that happened around the world. Look what happened to Charlie Hebdo cartoons. They were all killed in that office. Look what happened when they had the cartoons were that competition there in Denmark. And you can see there was about 17 people lost their lives in riots all over the world because of that. When that happened, I went down to Trafalgar Square. I was living in London at the time. And I wanted to see why Muslims were so upset with these cartoons against Muhammad. Because you look at Charlie Hebdo, look at the Charlie Hebdo cartoons against Jesus Christ. They're much, much worse than any cartoons against Muhammad. They're absolutely sacrilegious. They're pornographic, what they have against Jesus Christ. Yet we don't call for anybody to be killed because of that. We don't go up and have riots all over the world because of what Charlie Hebdo did or anybody does against Jesus Christ. So I wanted to find out why all these people, thousands, had gathered there at Trafalgar Square to confront these cartoons that were there in Denmark. And as I went to each person, I asked them, what is it about Muhammad that you are so upset about? Why is it we cannot take the mickey out of him? Why is it we cannot have simple cartoons like we do with Jesus Christ? And as I listened to them, they say, well, Muhammad is greater. He is closer to me than my father. He is closer to me than my brother. He is closer to me than my aunts and uncles. And I start hearing the same narrative, the same thing. And suddenly the penny dropped. They want what we already have. Mm-hmm. See, we know that Jesus is close to us than everybody else. We already know that Jesus is right here. He's right in this room. He's right there with you. Our Lord Jesus Christ, through the Holy Spirit, is omnipresent. The Holy Spirit has, wherever 2 or 3 are gathered, there I am with you. Christ is here with us. And everybody wants to know that kind of God. Everybody needs to have that kind of God. A God that enters time and space, comes down our direction. A God that walks and talks in the cool of the day with Adam and Eve. A God that sends prophet after prophet, then finally sends his own son. And a God that dies and rises again. Islam doesn't have that. Muhammad doesn't come close to that. Muhammad is nothing more than a man. And so therefore they have to have something that's equal with Jesus. Now they already did so historically by elevating him and putting him in the Shahada. What's next? The only other thing they can do is to elevate him and put him equal with God. They want in Muhammad what we have in Jesus Christ. And any Muslims that are listening to us, I say, listen, give up on Muhammad. He will never, ever replace Jesus Christ. Come on home. Come on home to Jesus Christ. You can have him right now. You don't have to do the Shahada. You don't have to do and read all this stuff that's here in the Quran. Come on back to the Bible and come back to Jesus Christ, because he is with you. He is wherever you go. He is with you for eternity, and he will be with you on the other side of death. That we can promise you. What you want in Muhammad, you're never going to get. You can get it in Jesus Christ. Come on home.
Amen. Thank you for that. What a good way to end the show. Dr. Bill, thank you for joining us. Dr. J. Smith, thank you for joining us as well. With that said, I want to remind everyone, paradise lost will be paradise restored only in Jesus. I always mention this on every show because it's a great hope that we have in Jesus. He will wipe away every tear from our eye. We will know no pain, no suffering. We will know nothing wrong, no sin. We won't have 72 virgins to go with all day sexually. This is not a good enough satisfaction for us as humans. In Jesus, we have a full satisfaction. Starting off in this life, what you must do is repent of your sin and believe in the Lord as he says who he is, God incarnate. In Islam, you have a messenger that is more respected and more revered than the one who is sending the message. In Christianity, we have Jesus, who is the message himself and the messenger, and the message is, without me, you will go to hell, which is a place where I don't want anyone to dwell, because once you're dead, you're there for a long time. With that said, thank you all for joining us. Have a good day.